For those that don't know it, the Group of Seven, G7, is meeting just outside of Calgary in the coming weeks. Those groups include additional countries such as India, and there's been some controversy over whether Canada should have invited India. India is not a regular member of the Group of Seven. The reason India is controversial at this meeting is because of the alleged assassination of Sikh activists in Vancouver several years back and the link to the Indian government. So, what's your opinion on that, Corey?
Well, I think we do have to include India into any world order now because they were trying to align more with Russia with that BRICS. So to bring Modi into the G7 as a guest of what's transpiring is a pretty good play on part of Carney inviting him. We need to strengthen the international order since the U.S. is a rogue state now. We can see that India has the largest population in the world for a country, and to have them on board will probably benefit the G7. I'm surprised that they haven't been invited to join and become the G8, but that's something for the future, I think. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think one of the issues that makes it more sensitive in Canada is Canada has the largest Sikh population outside of India. And there's a separatist movement going on in India right now to establish a state they call Khalistan, which would be an ethnic Sikh state nestled between India and Pakistan. The fact that activists are hiding in Canada isn't, it isn't news, but the fact that the activists were assassinated in Canada is particularly troubling for a lot of people in Canada, and it has upset Indian Canadian relationships. I don't know whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. It's probably a good idea that there be a face-to-face meeting between the Canadian Prime Minister and Modi in order to prioritize those types of disputes.
Yeah, like Canada, we have the French and our ancestors, the English. We've learned to get along for the most part. Canada can be an example maybe in how to deal with some of these relationships that are going on in India where more religious and sect division. I'm not really up on India politics, but as a previous Commonwealth country, they seem to operate under our legal system, but they still need to be modernized and brought into the new world order to help stabilize the world economies.
Anyways, that controversy perhaps will resolve itself. One of the big issues is the G7 even useful today? Is it a useful organization that's going to produce results that are assisting the world in general? And to to try to determine that, what we need to do is we have to look at the prior meeting in 2024 that was held in Italy, and they stated in their joint statement, in the spirit of shared responsibility, we warmly welcome the participation of the leaders of Algeria, Argentina, Brazil, India, Jordan, Kenya, Morantia, wherever that is, Tunisia, Turkey, and the United Arab Emirates. And you will notice there's obviously some countries missing there that represent a significant part of the world population and economic activity. So the result of that, interestingly enough, the first thing that they mention is steadfast support to the Ukraine. And they go on and on for 2.5 pages about how Russia's war against Ukraine is illegal. It doesn't stand up to international laws. How sanctions are being imposed on Russia. How Russian assets are being seized. how they condemn the seizure of foreign companies in Russia, which was in retaliation, et cetera, et cetera. And then they make a statement with respect to the conflict in Gaza. Now, the conflict in Gaza has been played out on the news for the last 2.5 years and cannot be ignored. There's a genocide going on there, and there's crimes against humanity.
Well, even
What
in the last week, there's been bombings of civilians that is just appalling. I mean,
but let's look at the difference though. After condemning Russia for 2.5 pages, they they state we reiterate our strongest condemnation of the brutal terrorist attacks conducted by Hamas and other terrorist groups against Israel on October 7, 2023. We express our full solidarity and support to Israel and its people and reaffirm our unwavering commitment towards its security. In exercising its right to defend itself, Israel must fully comply with its obligations under international law in all circumstances, including international humanitarian aid. Okay, so it's been played out in front of the world for 2.5 years. There's been no sanctions against Israel. All of this is just
well,
fluff.
one of the points is that even though Trump wasn't the president of the United States during that 2024 meeting, Trump controlled the Senate, and the Senate was blocking all aid to Ukraine. They've been blocking any sanctions against Israel, and that basically on the Senate. I mean, there are some other mitigating issues involved in it, but Trump has had his hand in control of the United States ever since his first presidency. The condemnation of Russia, I mean, when we have acts of clear siding of Trump with Putin, should Trump be really allowed to come to a meeting of the free world to bolster security? I mean, one of their agendas is to deal with transnational crime at this G7. So when you look at what is the crimes committed that around the world that they have to deal with on at a G7 level, one of the crimes would be the moving of illegal money across international borders untraced. So we have to look at one of the front runners of that concept is Trump himself, who set up his own Trump cryptocurrency. Now, cryptocurrency, Mark Carney is a bank leader, and cryptocurrency is the undermining of the banking institutions of the world because it has the ability to do untraceable transactions. In the case of President Trump, he's using that to feather his own nest by having people buy his cryptocurrency, and it's a form of buying favor, which we've seen numerous times. Do we really want the image of Canada to be tainted by allowing a felon to attend a G7 meeting that is to discuss international crimes, of which Gaza is one of the most important ones? Then there's the crime of Russia invasion, where the Trump is clearly siding with Putin, wanting him to be brought back and form the G8. That is not something I as an Albertan or I as a Canadian would like to see. And then now with the LA riots, where Trump is sending in the National Guard to feather and add fuel on a smoldering fire, he wants a blaze going. Is this the type of person that you want at a G7 meeting?
I'm suggesting it makes no difference because if you look at what the G7 has said and what the G7 has done, it's right out to lunch. For example, last year they said we reiterate our unwavering commitment to the vision of a two-state solution, and so they know that they've said that, and not one of those countries have done anything
No,
to
no,
move it.
no. Trump said he was willing to participate in a two-state solution. He wants the Trump state of resorts and golf courses on beachfront property in cooperation with Israel, and then all of a sudden we got more bombing of residential buildings so that it's a clearing operation.
So then they say, we note that mutual recognition to include the recognition of the Palestinian state at the appropriate time would be a crucial component of that political process. So what they're saying is it's not the crucial time yet. So even though we're paying lip service to this concept, it's not the crucial time yet. Then they go on and say all parties must refrain from unilateral actions that undermine the prospect of a two-state solution, including Israel expansion of settlements and the legalization of settlement outposts. Well, the Israelis just announced another 22 outposts. So
Yeah,
everything that's happening from the last meeting, all the grandiose statements are being trashed, and nobody in the world is doing anything about it except the poor Houthis, right? And
yeah,
what do they get for their trouble? They get bombed. Now,
by the U.S.
the latest garbage to come from the G7 meeting is they've made a declaration on maritime security and prosperity, and they're saying how the law of the sea and free and open secure maritime domains and rule of law strengthens international security, fosters economic prosperity, and ensures a sustainable use of maritime resources. Well, the Israelis just bagged a British flagged boat in the middle of the Mediterranean and seized the cargo and seized the individuals from all sorts of different countries, and nobody has condemned it.
Yeah,
So why is the G7 pretending that the law of the sea is important, but this episode doesn't make a blip on the international spectrum? So I think the G7 is a waste of time. It's a get together. Have a nice meal, talk about stuff in the back room, put out a press statement
yeah.
that
I
you
think it's more
know,
about the press statement because it's all hot air. They're not taking
yeah,
affirmative action.
yeah,
True leaders take affirmative action, and it's not just talk. They follow up on what they're discussing, and that's one of the issues. Is anything really going to be discussed of merit at this meeting? I mean, Taco Trump, and he doesn't like to be called a taco. He's going to be yeller. He's going to turn yellow at this meeting, and my prediction is he's not even going to want to show up because there's too many countries that are not going to be happy with his 50% tariff on aluminum, which increases the cost of a can of beer quite significantly. And it's going to be at a time when all these riots that he's instigating and trying to cause in the U.S. are coming to a head. And I can't see him really wanting to come to Canada. He's going to use the riots as an excuse not to attend a meeting where, there's a dozen countries that are going to oppose him and his little tantrum on immigrants and illegal countries and kiss the ring, here's your tariffs, or kiss the ring again. I mean, the whole G7 is going to be a joke if Trump's allowed to be there, and that's my prediction. He's going to try to claim that he's being picked on and and he's just going to throw more tariffs on top of countries saying, well, you didn't kiss the ring at the G7, so we're going to slap you with even more. I really, like you said, you can't not exclude him, but I think Trump stumbling on his steps up to the airplane yesterday shows that he's not in really good health. So to come to a meeting where he knows he's not going to be well received is probably not something he really wants to do. I would be surprised if he showed up.
I think the G7, like I said, is redundant. They put out these glorious press releases, knowing that they have no intention of fulfilling any of their promises. If we go back to the capture of the British flagged sailboat, the Israeli statement was the tiny amount of aid that was on the yacht and not consumed by the celebrities will be transferred to Gaza through real humanitarian channels. Now,
Yeah.
anybody who's been following the news knows that starvation has been used by the Israelis as a form of genocide,
Yeah.
and that they've set up these distribution centers where people are getting shot and the food isn't coming in any event. So the world has known that these people have been sailing towards Gaza for the last week. The prior ship was hit by drones and burnt up. Where was the world's condemnation of that? Where are the sanctions? I get a kick out of everybody goes, if you don't start feeding these people, we're going to have to do something, right? You know,
Yeah. It's a world of inaction, and I guess that's my point: is why bring the biggest bully to a meeting of what's supposed to be intellectual leaders to deal with issues on an international scale? I mean, tariffs alone. Look, that's an international war declared by this, taco that he has no. Even the courts in the U.S. said he has no power to implement these tariffs, and yet here he's still doing it. That to me becomes a lawless society. And why are we allowing a felon into our country? I mean, felons know all about crimes. That's not changing. Cryptocurrency is a big issue to me around the world, that it's a great money laundering scam. And you've got a guy that is our prime minister is supposed to be a banking authority in the world. Where does it stand on cryptocurrency to stop the illegal transfer of money and funds across international borders that is untraceable, and it's undermining our banking institutions to further align money to people like Trump. Trump made billions now on his cryptocurrency that is totally untraceable. He's selling out, favors under international transactions that are very dubious. And we have our prime minister is supposed to be a world banking authority. Where's he going to make a stand at the G7? I call on Carney. You should make a stand, and the G7 should make it illegal to transfer money untraceable through fake currency. And the stock market should never have allowed cryptocurrency to be allowed to be a currency. We had laws in place internationally that only countries could produce currency, and anybody manufacturing currency, it was against the law. So those lines haven't really changed, and cryptocurrency is not really a currency. So why is the stock market allowing it? Well, one simple thing. There's a lot of money to be made, and they blurred the lines between criminal activity and normal activity. I think the G7 needs to get some kahunas and say, hey, we got to deal with this elephant in the room, which is cryptocurrency. So that's one of the things on transnational crime that I think they need to deal with.
before
The
you go
other,
on, before you go on, I'd like to get you back to the topic here is the relevance
cool,
of the G7.
yeah,
Sure they can make statements about cryptocurrency, they can make statements about, funds traveling, around the world and supporting terrorism, whatever. But if you look again at what they did at the last G7 in 2024 in Italy, and don't forget the countries are Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom. The United States and the European Union as a guest at all of the meetings.
yeah,
They, of course, picked on Iran as well. And they said, we call on Iran's leaders to end all unjust and arbitrary detentions, including the dual and foreign citizens, and condemn the unacceptable harassment of its citizens. Now, where is that state? Now, if you change that to say we call on Israel's leadership to end all unjust and arbitrary detention, there's 10,000 people in detention, Palestinians
exactly.
in detention in Israel, and these people, the G7, are doing nothing. So why even have the G7? It's a waste of time. They reiterate our deep concern over Iran's human rights violations, especially against women, girls, and minority groups. Well, come on. 2/3 of the people they've killed in Gaza are women and children. So it it's toothless. So even to complain about cryptocurrencies is lip service.
Yeah.
It's a distraction. And if you look at the riots, as you mentioned in California, that's another distraction. A half a dozen people, 2 dozen people, whatever, were arrested. Big deal. You know,
Well, they're not going to get a pardon in California, but insurrectionists trying to overthrow the government got pardoned. That's a big hypocrisy in and of itself. But that shows the lawlessness of the state, and we shouldn't be allowing lawless countries to participate in the G7. That's my opinion, and I don't think Trump has demonstrated any reasonable ability to function as a champion of human rights in the world.
well, that goes without saying. But again, what's going to come out of this G7 meeting?
Well,
You
aren't
know,
they going to talk about global warming? I think that was on the agenda.
no, they've already done that 4 or 5 years in a row, and of course
Yeah.
now there's even less talk about it than there was
Well,
before.
my take on global warming is quit bullshitting the people. Carbon dioxide emissions. I haven't seen trees growing faster or crops growing faster. Carbon dioxide actually makes plants grow faster. So you'd actually be able to quantify that the carbon dioxide is the root cause. And that's not the real root cause. Let's get real. The real root cause of global warming is what I call the electric blanket effect. We have asphalt, concrete, rock. We are causing an electric blanket by our human footprint in residential and cities where we have so much concrete and asphalt reflecting heat back into the atmosphere. The only difference is they won't acknowledge that the human footprint is the problem because they can use carbon capture as a monetary capitalization to make money off of carbon. Well, you can't make money off of putting grass and growing trees and cutting the reflection of heat into the atmosphere and actual of the global warming. Now, with 8 billion people on the planet, I think the G7 should, knuckle down and say these are the real issues, is that we have this problem where we're not cooling the earth with our concrete, our asphalt, and our gravel, and we need to deal with that issue on a G7 level. At least talk about it, make it forefront, quit playing into the money-making concept of carbon capture. Yes, we do need to capture carbon, but it's not the problem of it's not going to solve the heat being released off our concrete and asphalt, which is the underlying problem of heating the atmosphere. So those I'd like to see at the G7. I know you're a very strong environmentalist as well as I am. So what's your take on global warming?
Well, every one of these leaders will be arriving on a private jet.
Yeah.
They could have easily held the meeting, over a teleconference and avoided all the additional pollution that they're putting up in the air. So I mean,
Well, look at us. We're talking over the internet, and there's no problem with the communication. You could have 7 people sitting on this interview and still have a better meeting than sometimes in person. So,
well, when they had the last international meeting on global warming, they held it in Dubai, where they air conditioned the outdoors when it's 50 degrees Celsius.
yeah.
It's a bit of a joke when they start talking. And again, that brings back to the question, why do we have the G7? And what you see is the press releases are the shiny object. The real reason for the meeting is to beat up on Russia, beat up on Iran, promote Israeli occupation of Gaza, and now with the first ministers giving the press release with respect to the freedom of the seas, what they're doing is they're beating up again on Iran. They're beating up on the Houthis. They're talking about the transportation of immigrants because they want to make Fortress Europe. They can't build a wall around the Mediterranean Sea, but they can control the export of people from Africa is what they're trying to do.
So what
And
I'm
it's
hearing you saying is you'd probably like the G7 to deal with what constitutes proper media around the world.
I'd
I
like
mean,
them to
that's
look.
not on the agenda, but we don't have proper journalism anymore, and hidden agendas and privately owned media outlets have hidden agendas where they're promoting whatever they're getting paid the most for because it's a business. They're not interested in reporting actual fact and what have you. They're interested in lining their pockets. It's a capitalist ideology that if you're going to have journalism and media, you better make lots of money off it. And if promoting lies and deception and the wealthiest countries in the world are going to pay for your promotion of their agendas, that's all what capitalism is. So I think that if I was a leader of a country, I would want to make a strong statement at a G7 meeting that, look, we know there's propagandist promotions now. There's no such thing as free press. We as a G7 need to change some laws internally in our constitutions to make it illegal to lie on national TV or in the media or on social media, which is another freedom of express on social media needs to be dealt with on a G7 level as well, because that is a propagandist. I mean,
I I
allowing
get,
slander and lies and
but again,
whatever.
that just goes. What they need to do is when they say things like we are particularly concerned by the situation along the blue line. Now they're talking about the line that separates Israel and Lebanon and Syria,
Correct.
and it was patrolled by the UN interim force. Well, the Israelis just blew them out, made them targets, and
Right.
took it over. Now, you would think that the Canadian government would at least say something, and you think the Americans would say, okay, we're not selling you any more weapons because you're misusing them. You know, they
No.
they they give you this lip service about these wonderful things that they believe in, but they have no responsibility to implement them, and because of that, they're wasting their time. They're waste like just
Well,
live
that
up.
G7 is a waste of time and money,
Yeah,
and the added money. I mean, look at the security. Like I'm in Calgary, and there's cops everywhere. Like they've doubled the police force as near as I can tell. Heck, I go up to the airport, and I'm following the speed limits and everything else, and I get pulled over because I got slightly tinted windows, and they want to see who's in the car, but they can clearly see who it is, and I get a ticket. Well, that's a fabricated ticket. I bought the
well,
frickin' car off a
well,
dealership. It's
let me get
within
you
the
back.
law.
Let me get you back to the point though. Here is that the Americans vetoed the last peace resolution at the UN.
Right.
Now, if they're really interested in international law, and if they're really interested in stopping genocide, if they're really interested in stopping the starvation, they would do something. But they don't do anything. So what the G7 is, it's a cover for a bunch of bad actors, in my opinion.
Like, why do we have veto power at a United Nations? That might have worked right after World War II. It is totally stupid in today's world to have any country with veto power. U.S. definitely does not need veto power. They're morons. I mean, you put a felon in charge of your country. You should not have veto power. Putin, he's a warmonger. If you blink, he's going to take what he can. That's his modi operandi. He does not need veto power. We, the free nations of the world, need to say, no, I don't care how much power you have. We do not give you veto power. China should not have veto power. And you know why I make that statement now? Is because Ukraine has shown the world that even a small country can hold its own against these mighty superpowers. And maybe it's time the UN got some balls and took away the veto power. And if the G7 had any guts at this meeting, they would table that all veto powers be removed from the UN. And the G7 has the clout to make and ensure that happens, especially if India comes on board, because they are up and coming contender on the world stage.
We just went through the fact that G7 has no power whatsoever.
Yeah,
They're
well,
they're not
we're
going to
trying to
change
give
any.
them some balls. I mean,
They,
get
they,
some balls or quit wasting taxpayer dollars on bullshit.
you'll
I
you'll
mean,
you'll you'll like this, right? Their last statement from the last one was the continuing Houthi attacks in the Red Sea risk destabilizing the region, stopping freedom of navigation and trade flows, and endangering the UN-led, my screen just UN-led roadmap towards peace in Yemen. Okay, so that presumes that there's a UN-led roadmap,
yeah.
and it's all the fault of the Houthis, right? And you
Well,
it,
I mean, Iran never breached any frickin' contract. They tried to be a good international player and did a contract, and here the U.S. under Trump comes in and tries to steamroll Iran. And the only reason Trump has tried to steamroll Iran under the first presidency was simply Iran's got oil and Trump wanted the oil, and the U.S. wants the oil. And guess what? I have no problem with Iran. The big problem was Trump, and Trump is still a big, huge problem. Now
so
that
so
orange taco's coming to Banff and Kananaskis, and I can hardly wait to see the tantrums and shit shows that he's going to try to do in the media. And what you think Smith is going to have a private meeting to sell out Alberta when Trump's here in, or
uh, who knows?
little
That'll
Texas?
be another conversation because we would just be guessing. But I can tell you that from the last G7, they said we call on the Houthis to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law and cease their attacks in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and surrounding waters. Now, if you recall the news recently, I know you're probably turning this off, but if you recall that,
No, I'm not starting
if you
this off.
recall the news lately, the British, the Americans, and the Israelis have been bombing the Houthis. So who's the
Yeah,
destabilization, in destroying the UN roadmap to peace in Yemen? It's
the Middle East has to be dealt with by the G7 and the UN. And when they fail to act in any meaningful ways, and there's, turning a blind eye to war crimes and not taking proactive actions, like, that's a problem. The UN needs to have some strength. The G7 has to quit being a lip service to the US. And that's all they are, is lip service to the US. And now they've got a felon running the US, and Carney and the G7 are just playing lip service. They're trying to make themselves out to be different, but they're not. They're kissing the ring. And how do we know they're kissing the ring? The orange tacos coming to Kananaskis. We shouldn't be giving them exemption to come into our country as a felon and a sexual predator. That's not cool. That's saying we as a people accept that we have to kiss the ring. And sorry, I don't think we have to kiss the ring, and I don't think we should be allowing a felon in. We're sending the wrong message to the UN and to other countries in the world, is that it doesn't matter that you have a rogue president in the United States and that the US cannot be trusted on anything. We're the biggest trade partner in the US, and when we're afraid to stand our ground against the US on an international level, that's sending the wrong message. That's not my Canadian values. My Canadian values say we are a law-abiding country, which we've turned into a system very similar to the US, where we can't even trust our justice system because it's politically appointed by people that are elected, backed by the wealthy, which is the same problem the US has now. So the G7, I want to see Carney, perform at the G7 and make some real headway, like you said. Otherwise, it's just a joke. Why have the G7? You got any more takes on your research that way
Oh,
beyond my research?
I'm sure they're going to come up with some announcement about, uh, economic stability, international law and order, and all these nice things about how the people in Gaza should be free, but they're a bunch of murdering Hamas, and on and on and on and on, and nothing will happen.
Well,
What
Carney's supposed to have a press release today where
what's
he's
going to
going to say that he's going to increase our military spending, and he's going to invest in some drones and some underground water detection for the Arctic. He's going to spend a lot of money. I'm not sure he's going to spend the $19 billion on the U.S. jets, the F-35s. I think we're ordering in 88 of them. But I'd like to see him at the G7 just say, look, we're tearing up that contract and we're going with the Gripen jets out of Europe, and say, send a message loud and clear to the U.S. We can't trust you to buy military weapons off of you. We have to unite with Europe and be the peacekeepers of the world. And to do so, we have to tear up this $19 billion contract and get more reliable partners, and that means getting our military equipment from other countries. Like our over-the-horizon detection system is being upgraded. They spent a few $1 billion in the Arctic, and they're dealing with Australian companies versus the U.S. companies.
But who
So,
cares? Like who cares? So who's going to fly over the Arctic and bother us, right? Like it's a joke. What we should be doing is we should be spending the money on made in Canada water bombers to control the
well,
forest fires that are ravaging the prairie provinces at the moment. That is a Canadian issue that's important. Instead of buying jets so that we can back up the Americans when they take on their next stupid adventure and bomb the crap out of some third world country, like
well, Canada
why are
needs
we
to be the peacekeeping nation of the world because we are a multicultural nation. And we lost that under Harper. We used to be recognized as a peacekeeper. We don't need jets, and we don't need any of these assault weapons, and that's what they are. We need defensive weapons, and we need to show the world again that Canada can be a leader, and we are the peacekeeping nation to look at for keeping peace all around the world. And because of our multicultural aspects, the G7 is the ultimate place to say to the world, look, Canada's back. We're going to take on that role as peacekeepers. We're going to show and lead by example. And if that means we have to oppose the U.S., we oppose the U.S. That's our reputation.
no. What Canada needs to do is Parliament has to say we're going to impose the same sanctions on Israel that we've imposed on Russia, and
Yeah,
and and,
I
and that's
agree.
and that's where you do it. You do it in the Canadian Parliament. You don't waste your time, putting out press releases at the end of a conference that
Well, it
nobody.
sets a
No,
guidance for Parliament. If you go on an international stage, you don't want to be looking like a buffoon. If you say it on an international stage and it goes around the world, then Parliament has the ability to implement that. Even the Conservatives would have to vote in favor of it because it's an international statement. And I mean, we have a minority government, so we have to have 3 votes to get anything passed. So I think making critical statements at a G7 would go a long ways to showing that Canada
okay,
has
but
the ability.
you've forgotten what I read to you from the previous statement.
No, I
All
haven't
parties
forgotten.
must refrain from any unilateral actions that undermine the prospect of a two-state solution, including Israeli expansion of settlements and the legalization of settlement outposts.
Yeah.
Canada could have said, following the communique from 2024, we are bringing sanctions against Israel for expanding their settlements. And
We
so
need to do that. I mean,
well,
absolutely.
the blueprint is there, but the thing is, we won't. And so why even bother with the G7? It's
Well,
just
if Carney had the balls to bring it up at the G7, and the 12 or 15 nations there finally said, yes, that's something we should look at, or that's something we should do, it would have carry a lot of weight. but like you said, it's only talk if it's just a press release. And you have to take affirmative action. So at the G7, he can push for affirmative action. By refusing to push for affirmative action by these countries, saying, hey, you push it before your parliament, this is what we're doing. Canada can make the statement, we're doing it and we'd like you on board.
They won't even talk about it though, Corey. And the thing is,
cheap, it takes money to buy whiskey is the old saying. But that's the problem in the world right now. And Carney has the opportunity to set a name for himself as a leader and say, this is what we're doing, and we are going to follow up and do it. And that has a lot of credibility if you follow up. If you just talk in hot air, yeah, you might as well go kiss the ring of Trump, because you're meaningless.
Do it before the meeting. So you set an example for those others that are at the meeting that this is what we're doing, right? We're following our last communique from 2024 and implementing sanctions against Israel.
That's what I would do as a leader. I mean, that only makes sense. But I mean, Carney wasn't involved in politics very much. He's new to politics. He knows international banking, but international banking means you got to kiss a lot of wealthy people's backsides to maintain the banking order. So I don't see him being able to take a stance on very much.
Corey, I think you're underestimating everything. The world's been run by politicians up to the point where you had a non-politician in Trump and a non-politician in Carney come to power, possibly being politicians. They can change things. Like perhaps they don't know that they're not supposed to put sanctions on Israel. Perhaps
we'll watch Carney's actions.
Perhaps they know that just because you don't approve of killing women and children and starving people, you're not anti-Semitic. Perhaps they don't know that having a moral stand in the world is important today.
Well, I wouldn't compare Carney to Trump. I mean, Carney is not Trump.
No, I'm just saying
is not a Trump, and he has values, morals, ethics, and he comes from the world of money, which.
No, I'm just saying you're underestimating him because he's a non-politician. You're saying he doesn't.
I'm hoping he's stepping up. I'm trying to say in this podcast, Carney, get some balls, step up, and show us what you're capable of. I believe in him. He got my vote, so go for it. Show the world that you can make an impact as a Canadian, and I'm behind you 100%. I mean, some of your policies I may not agree with, but the fact that you can make an impact and should make an impact, I'm behind you. Like, I'd like to see you stand up and become the leader you can be on the G7. So please step up and make Canada proud of you. We don't need kiss in the ring. We don't need rhetoric in the news that you're going to maybe do this and maybe do that and never follow up. Yes, put sanctions on Israel. Israel needs sanctions. Oppose world order that turns a blind eye to war crimes. Make a stand. Be a man. You have to commit.
I'm not holding my breath.
Well,
they say one thing and do another. Yeah, they say one thing and do another.
So what else in there do you think we should discuss on G7?
Well, let's wait and see what happens. But I know they're going to come up with some kind of statement. The statement's going to have all kinds of platitudes in it, and none of the countries that are there have any intention of seeing whatever it is they're talking about through to the end, except for and the hint is this early report with respect to the law of the sea. And the reason the law of the sea is going to be important to the G7 countries is because it will allow them to clamp down on China's claim, to the China Sea. And perhaps boost Trump's claim to the Gulf of America. And who knows? Maybe the law of the sea will allow Trump to justify taking out Greenland. You just don't know where these people are coming from, right? But when they signal this law of the sea aspect, that's going to be the main target.
Trucks, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's another reason that having Modi at this meeting might be good, because Modi can maybe make an impact on it by stating the stance of India or changing the stance of India on concerns of Russia and the Ukraine. Maybe India can stand up and say we're sanctioning Israel. Maybe Modi can make a big impact too, to bolster the image of India on an international scale. So we can only hope for the best and keep our fingers crossed that we have some real meaningful impact from this G7. I'm always an optimist. I hope they can follow through. You're more of a pessimist on this, but
No, 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 no,
realistically, I
no,
believe you're right.
no,
And
no. I'm not a
hoping and
pessimist.
praying for
I'm,
a positive
I'm a, re-
outcome is,
I'm a realist. I'm reading to you from the last statement that you
I
can now
know,
compare to the
and the
actions.
more you read, the
It,
more depressed I get. All my hopes are being dashed, and I'm feeling let down now because I was hoping that Carney would be the savior of the Canadian image, that we are peacekeepers and love the order of law, and I'm feeling, less Canadian. And I think I'm ninth or 10th generation Canadian, and I'm like, oh, please, please, don't let me down. And I mean, I'm speaking on behalf of my own opinion that I think Carney could be a very positive impact, and I'd hate to look like a fool.
well, if you look at the countries that put forth the charges against Netanyahu as a war criminal,
Yeah,
it's South Africa, a country that suffered apartheid for a century,
yeah.
uh, and they're the only ones that were able to stand up and say, okay, it's not anti-Semitic, it's pro international law. Now, why didn't Canada and France and Britain and Germany, and Italy join, with
That's a
this? And
good question. I mean, Canada has been, you know, losing its credibility for quite a while now on an international stage by hiding under the skirt of the Americans. And I think it's time that Canada said, hey, we are not American, we are not the US, and it is time to make the world known that Canada is back. We are back. We want to be peacekeepers in the world, and we cannot tolerate our neighbor being a rogue state with a felon running it, and we will not tolerate being bullied. And that goes to, we can trade with anybody in the world, and we should do so and quit dealing with the U.S. And I think that's possible at the G7, is to set up new trade alliances, which is part of their agenda as well, as to add more stability on an international level. And maybe that's where the meeting's going to go, is establishing new trade ties and letting the U.S. know we're not exclusively dealing with you anymore. You've set the new parameters for a stronger trade bloc, excluding you. So maybe that's what we can hope from the G7.
I think what you're going to see from the G7 is they're going to try to pressure India into buying the F-35 and join the club, who manufacture all the parts, and to break their contracts they have with the Russians, and quit buying their aircraft. It's going to be a pressurized sales
Well, I hope they're
meeting.
selling the Griffin, because it's not, I don't want to see the F-35s. I want to see the European jets being back. I think it
I want to
adds
see
more stability in the world if
I
the
want to see
Griffins are the ones.
water bombers, put the fires out. If
Well,
we increase, we can call our firefighters military if we wish, and increase the military spending by having the firefighters in the military. And if you think about it, they would have a rational salary base. you would have all the training, all the communication, you would have all the infrastructure for the aircraft, the mobility, the firefighting. It makes sense. If you look,
Well,
half the
common sense is not part of military budgeting.
Corey,
That's,
the smoke is landing on Boston,
I know.
all the way to Boston. Now you think the Americans would be a little pissed off that they're, and demand that we have more firefighting technology and equipment, and
Well, I
it would
agree
make.
with you. I mean, military spending these days is probably a waste of time because drone technology is proven to be very effective for defense, and that we can thank Ukraine for, and that doesn't require as much spending. So yes, I agree with you that if you're going to spend on jets, maybe that money would be better spent on firefighting equipment that can be converted to aiding in humanitarian aid around the world, and that is more a Canadian presentation to the world that we are here for the world, and the G7 could do that, saying, we're canceling the jet contract and let's go with water bombers and humanitarian aid helicopters and things that make more sense on an international scale. I'd love to see that. That would even be a win-win at the G7. But do you think Carney is going to oppose the U.S. requirement of us spending more money on military items bought from the U.S.? And
See,
that brings me back to Trump refusing to allow Ukraine to buy Patriot systems that they've said we'll pay cash for. And Trump has totally ignored and not allowed it so that Russia can continue bombing residential buildings with impunity. And if they release these systems to Ukraine, Russia's continual nightly bombardment of residential buildings for terror, and terror is the only reason you do that. Trump is aiding and abetting Putin to commit war crimes.
Corey, they're giving Netanyahu 2,000-pound bombs to bomb tents.
That's
and
ridiculous too. I mean,
no, it's outrageous.
Where do you draw the line? I mean, this is getting way out of hand.
It's outrageous. And the thing is, I won't say it's like comparing apples and oranges, but if you look at the increase demanded in military spending by the Americans, they want the world to buy their military equipment.
Oh, absolutely. It's a money grab, and they go around the world promoting wars and conflicts. I mean, Trump sent in the National Guard just to flame a conflict in LA so he can gaslight MAGA supporters that it's immigrants, criminal immigrants causing all the problems in LA. It's just unbelievable. Which goes back to, maybe could the G7 say there's got to be some truth in media and journalism in a world scale?
Anyways, Corey.
Okay. We'll have another session.
We'll have to see what the G7 does. But I'm betting that they put out this wonderful statement that kind of bounces around on the law of the sea and international rules and law and how it has to be obeyed, and it just means nothing again, right?
And I'm gonna predict that Trump is gonna throw a big temper tantrum at the G7, and then all the rest of the G7 are gonna kiss his ring because they're afraid of the tariff wars, and they're gonna kneel down to King Trump, and Trump wins at the G7. So that's my prediction. And Smith will be there having a private meeting with Trump to sell our resources at a discount to the U.S. to keep in his good books.
I don't know if
on that note, let's get our prediction.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.